Hey Boo, today's video is a part 2 or sequel to my last video. And that video, which was about looking for evidence of your desire, had been prompted by a viewer who had commented about the challenges of surrendering to the imagination to bring the desire into existence. And after that video had aired, they wrote again to me, and that prompted today's video. This is what they wrote. Thanks so much for addressing my question. Heart emoji. Yes, I do understand all these concepts on a rational level, but I don't know how to fully see it right here and now. I do understand it is already created in my 4D, but how do I transfer it into my 3D reality? This is such a key question because you are far from alone. This is, in fact, where so many students or clients that we, teachers and coaches of the law of assumption, of manifesting, of consciousness, often see. This is where we see them getting stalled or stuck. And it comes down essentially from what the viewer mentioned in their comment right away, the rational mind, running interference. So to be clear, I'm in no way judging or shaming anybody's way of thinking because, it is so natural to how we perceive, and especially when we're learning about manifesting on a conscious level, and the mind is very full of concepts and how to apply them, and it takes time to get comfortable with taking the feeling over the thinking, and that's what I'm addressing here. So the mind, the rational mind, is about reasoning and analyzing and logic. The rational mind is also about time and expectation. It pits itself against infinite intelligence, really is pitting itself against infinite intelligence, what Neville called the unseen reality, or what's called the higher self or source or the infinite, whatever it is you want to call it. And I deeply get it. And that I'm making this video partly to say that bringing your desire into tangible, touchy-feely form it's not a how activity. It isn't. And that is challenging for the rational mind to accept. If the rational mind is always being the lookout, it's looking out into the appearances of the 3D world, it's still more focused out there in that external perception of the 3D, which is always on lag time. It's always on delay from what was imagined. And while you are an infinite being existing across all levels of consciousness, it seems to be in conflict or hard to understand that you are also at that level. The thinking mind has a hard time expanding beyond that. It can understand it intellectually, but to feel it and know it in the deepest sense or the highest sense, that's where the challenge comes in, especially in the beginning, or even after being diligent and really feeling you're applying all the elements of the law. It still can happen. So thinking of the methods and concepts of time is not thinking or feeling from the feeling of deep satisfaction, the feeling, and here we're talking about relationships, the feeling of intimacy, of being romantic or spoiled by your partner, or whatever being happily partnered means for you. And even if this is super simplifying it, your body knows how to breathe. Think of it this way. And I could teach you various forms of what yoga calls pranayama, the directing of the breath to expand energy, to change the feeling of where the breath is moving, to open up parts of the body or parts of your deeper spiritual being through your breathing. And yeah, you might spend a lot of time working on all these methods. First, you breathe into your belly, and then your diaphragm, and then your chest. It's called a 3-part breath, and you can work on that a lot. But it's when that feeling of it becomes more about the movement of energy and the mind drops away from it a little bit, then you know you have reached another level of the practice. But otherwise, it's that constant, am I doing it right? I can't feel it. I can feel it here, but I can't feel it there. And this comes up when you're very focused on all the nuts and bolts of it. And this is what happens when the rational mind is still wanting to be in charge, wanting to be more in control, and has a difficult time quieting down or moving over. And the root here is that it's not what you have to do. Your state of living from, having that relationship, as the viewer had mentioned, this will be actually what moves you. This will be where the surrender happens. It's in being like organically moved, not externally moved or thinking about how to move or how to get it. This feeling that comes directly from the state as it's being moved by what Neville would call your dimensionally larger self or your infinite self. This is what can move you or urge you or prompt you to travel or change where you live or take a class somewhere, even online, or even change up your job or change up the location of your job. Any of these things that could bring you and your person together. It can't be forced. It can't be manipulated. My own mentor has often talked, Mr. 2020 has often talked about how he was brought halfway around the world from the US to Australia in his state of happy, loving husband, where he met the woman who would become his wife and who he's been happily married to now for over a dozen years. And there is, in all that happened, there was nothing he had to plan or scheme or set up for that to happen. It just brought him from the US to Australia, where he would wind up meeting the love of his life, who became his wife. And that means there was nothing to figure out. There was nothing to rationalize. And there was nothing to reach for. It isn't figured, it's not part of the equation of allowing or surrendering and letting the state lead. Surrendering is really a way of allowing, or maybe if that's a difficult concept to grasp, then use permitting. It's permitting the state to lead. And it might feel like initially you're giving permission. But if that is helpful to you, then approach it from that. And from there, it will keep softening into that idea of allowing, and from there into surrendering. It becomes smoother, easier, more simple, more approachable, could say more better, but it happens with greater naturalness, with greater simplicity, and with greater speed. So again, there's nothing to have to figure out. And you also have to consider that when you talk about your rational mind, in the word rational, you have ratio, which is a proportion. So it means you're conscious of things being in a certain proportion to each other. Like, I did this practice of imagining. Now that means that in a certain amount of time, I should expect to see my desire. So that's a ratio. Like, I did this practice, just for example, and I'm just playing here, but I did this practice for 15 minutes, and in 60 minutes, I should see my desire. I'm just using that as a way of showing a ratio of 1 to 4, something like that. If I'm saying, but there's that element of time and expectancy, or even the idea of rationing. I'm rationing out this amount of time as what seems appropriate, enough time for my desire to show up. And again, it's limited. It's the limited mind that is in the body, which is in a limiting time frame if it looks out into the 3D, whereas your true self, your ultimate self, is beyond any concept of time, which enables you to reshape time, which is why Neville had the concept of make then now and make there here. You're bringing everything into the only time there is, which is the now. Not the now just as in the present moment, but the now, the entirety of the now, the all that exists now. So this is letting go of anything else and allowing God as the infinite to move you and move through you as your world gets rearranged. So there's really no space here for being rational. There's no need to cling on to being rational. And yes, it's something that seems like it's a permanent part of your thinking or your mind. It's more of a way that the mind has been trained or shaped to think in rational ways. But we also know that we have the ability to be spontaneous, or to experience something or do something in an unexpected way that's beyond thinking. If you're laughing hysterically, you can't think a thought and be laughing hysterically, for instance, at the same time. Anything that you notice how the mind can't put anything together when you're just laughing about something. And so it's, in a way, it's the same thing. It's the play, the divine play of consciousness, which really has that element of letting the mind subside, letting all the thinking processes subside. That's really what it is. You're not proportioning anything or putting anything out in limited increments. Or being logical. It's not an A to B logic. The greater consciousness does not move in a linear way, whereas the mind just wants to be in limited increments. 1 + 1 is 2, 2 + 2 is 4. And this is why this reliance on the limited increments, on time expectations, is why the irritation or anxiety or frustration or impatience sets in, that it hasn't happened. And even the self-judging, like, what am I doing wrong here? I've learned all these techniques, but really the self and what it does in consciousness, or the Christ consciousness, is beyond all techniques. Those are given to us to give us something to work with until we can let go of them. And that's like, an artist creating, but first they have to learn certain principles of drawing or painting, and then they can, but their mind has other ideas, and they let go of anything they ever learned and just go beyond. Their brilliance of making an image is inspired. It's beyond. Think of Van Gogh and Starry Night, or the Mona Lisa, or any great painting that you've ever seen that was beyond simply what the rules about making an image on canvas were about. And that's because the operant power form of you that you are is unlimited. It can imagine and live in that imaginal life, which is just as true and just as real, if not realer, than what appears externally. But again, it has to come back to being connected to the feeling of it. And if the mind is resisting and fighting, which it may well do, it's going to take time to ease that down. And that's why practices like state akin to sleep are so great, or even meditation, or just repeating I am, or be still and know I am God. This is understanding who your I am is. It always comes back to that. So it's the Delulu that is actually the greater reality, as opposed to the visible, external, limited world being the illusion, or the world that we add meaning to, that we have something or we don't have something, that we mistake one thing for another. And yeah, you want to be lovingly patient with yourself. Because when that anxiety cuts in, it's separating you from the God self. It's what my mentor called separation anxiety from God. It's the forgetting that your awareness of being is God. Be still and know I am God. And in Neville's talks from 1948, he did a number of very important lectures that year. And in lesson 3, which he calls Thinking Fourth Dimensionally, he talks about what he calls the two minds, or the two outlooks that everyone has, that we all have. And the one mind is known as the carnal, which means it relates to the body, or the natural mind. That's the mind that's always looking out there. It's the one that's always spinning as to its appearances. And he says that's the mind that only understands that, okay, this is right now. We have the memories of the past, and we totally have no knowing of what the future is going to bring. And the other outlook, the other mind, is what he calls the Christ mind, Christ consciousness as it's known. And that's not about any particular religion or denomination. This is the reference to the one mind, to divine mind, to the highest consciousness, not the localized consciousness of the body, but the vast consciousness that we are. that you are. And your natural mind, he said, or carnal mind, is about what's going on in the present moment. Now, the Christ mind, which reflects the facet or of the diamond of divine mind, the past, present, and future are bound up together as one whole. One whole. And the reason why it's so challenging to surrender to knowing you have your desire, Neville says this is simply a habit. It's a pattern. But it's not the cosmic law. It's habit to constantly bounce your thinking off what is appearing out there. When you want to be, as he said, blind and deaf to all of that, which is why Paul said in Corinthians 15:31, I die daily. He turned away from the world of appearances, the shadow world. And it's surrendering and allowing, but it takes practice. It does. And we all fall off from time to time. It happens. It just happens. It causes us to forget our true nature. And when you feel that anxiety or frustration or impatience, and the time-centered emotions start to show up, anger or jealousy, envy, for any kind of related time-bound emotion, that's the time to stop and breathe and move your body, shake up the nervous system, and even to laugh and say, be loving towards yourself and laugh. And, you can play with it and just say to yourself, just kidding. I wasn't really upset. I wasn't really frustrated. It's just kidding. Or no biggie, which is what my colleague Karen Sinclair says. No biggie. And it enables you to then withdraw, breathe, and step back down from that watchtower that's looking out into the 3D world with just climbing down that staircase, back into your heart center, back into your deeper consciousness with love, with compassion for yourself, with remembering where your desire is within you. I love you. I know you can do it, boo. You got this. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.